You boys look like a weird heavy metal band.
Yes, we are a band.
Really?
Yeah.
So what you play?
Symphonic post-apocalyptic reindeer grinding Christ abusing extreme war pagan Fennoscandic metal.
Right.
Welcome to another rousing edition of For the Sake of Heaviness.
Rousing.
I'm here as always with not arousing, but rousing.
I was waiting for that. I
With
knew it.
Merciful Mike Smith is
Next
here
week.
with us as always. The co-pilot, the main pilot. I'm the co-pilot. Tonight I'm on autopilot of stupid.
No, there's a whole lot of that going on over here too, man. We're both co-pilots. I can't fly this plane by myself, so thankfully I got Butch with me. What are we talking about tonight, Butch?
Tonight, for your viewing edification, I don't even know what that word means. Tonight, Mike and I are going to discuss something we haven't really talked about before. You know some of the bands we like and stuff, but tonight we're going to talk about our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 favorite heavy metal, hard rock genres and subgenres and sub genres and sub genres. We're not going to get into that minutia, but maybe we will, but maybe we won't. You have to watch to find out.
Yeah, you gotta watch to find out how deep will they go with the subgenres.
But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Like Batman, we're old, so when we were kids, like honest to God, like everything was metal.
Yep.
We called everything heavy metal back then. I mean, sometimes you got hard rock, and I mean there were terms for things. You know, you glam metal,
Yep.
whatever. But there wasn't like such a breakdown in, and then thrash metal came along. But it wasn't like, man, like as the years went on, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing or a good thing. You know, we know it's a marketing thing. You have to, as music has changed, you want to get music into the ears of people that you think would like it. So
Yeah.
they find ways to describe things to like really like, you know, push it to certain crowds of people where they think there's going to be an automatic audience for it. It's one, push a band is it became so wide with what the different things did that you said something was heavy metal. It wasn't necessarily, well, what kind?
Right.
You know, it's like, does it sound like Candlemass or does it sound like Motley Crue or
Right.
does it sound like Death? You know, Entomb, does it sound like Cradle of Filth? You know, it's like one of those things. Like
Everybody needs that reference point. It seems like that niche marketing has become so important now when you're promoting a band because everybody wants everything to fit nice and neatly into a slot. But like you said, us growing up, it was all metal. It was all heavy. I don't really think that, you know, the breakdown of genres really took place probably until the 80s, to be honest with you.
yeah,
Up to that point was just metal.
I think as heavy metal got more extreme over the years, I think you began to see more, and as it cross-pollinated too with hardcore and some other genres, you know, electronic, you know, and when industrial came in and it got when it started to get a little bit more harsh, like you started having fans that came up that, you know, the kids that came into metal a little bit later as it was getting more extreme, they didn't want to hear, you know, some of those kids didn't want to hear Poison, for example, or Tesla or Dokken or Motley Crue or Kiss. Like that stuff wasn't heavy enough for them. So I think you started having to declare what something was.
Yeah.
In order to market it better. Like you don't want to, you know, you try to push Voivod to a Dokken fan. Now I'm not saying I like Dokken, I like Voivod both, but you know, if you're trying to push a band and put it out there, you have to like try to get it to the people that are most likely to buy it. So I think that's where the sub genres started coming in, like so that you could,
I agree,
you know, really like, well, how do we get a hold of the fans that like their music slow and Sabbathy and mournful? That's doom metal or But then, you know, it did get, you know, we could probably do a whole episode about this. It got a little bit, you know, in some ways it gets a little bit nutty because then even within genres, you know, there was a split and I'm sure you can remember this, Mike, like around the probably going back into the 90s, and then into the early 2000s, like there was a split, like the doom metal itself, like there still to this day exists, like there are folks that think doom metal is like, they don't look at Candlemass and Trouble and stuff like that as doom. Like doom to
Right.
them is like skepticism and
Right.
like funeral doom kind of stuff, like
I was just gonna
Winter, like
say,
it's gonna be super heavy and slow and brutal.
and then Death
Uh,
Doom.
Death, it's just a Death Doom, and so what's doom? People arguing back and
Yeah.
forth about it. There was like they had the Circle of True Doom for a while,
Yep.
which I thought was cool, but some people were like, would get up in arms about, because they were
Yeah.
trying to like preserve like their
Yep.
wall of the doom that we all liked
Yep.
and stuff.
They did
So
and
it's like,
defended that. Yeah.
yeah,
My favorite subgenre of doom was nautical funeral doom. And that I think that all came about from that band Ahab, because they did an entire album based off of Moby Dick and things that were on the water and all that. So it was nautical funeral doom.
dude, that is outstanding, because I've never heard of that before, and I thought you were just making it up until you
No,
brought
it's
Ahab
true.
up. And
Yeah.
so it's nautical funeral doom. So
So you can see just how deep into the subgenres you can get. A
Mastodon was trying to cross over to that with Leviathan.
little bit, a little bit. Yes,
Yeah,
they were. They wanted the nautical tag.
they didn't have the funeral part of it though.
No, no, they didn't.
That's wild.
All right. Well, Butch, go ahead. I'll let you start here. What do you are
All
you
right,
gonna?
I'm not gonna really put these in. I'm not gonna really rank them, because on any given day,
No,
man,
good. Okay. I'm not either.
mood.
I can give you the evolution of where they kind of fall, but yeah, I don't really have these ranked by any
Yeah, I
means.
mean, my mood
They're my
dictates what I'm going to
favorites.
listen to.
Yeah.
Some days I'm like, I really want something to, like the other day I was like, really, I don't know, just was in a mood. And I'm like, I'm putting on the Cancer Bats
There you go.
today. Like I was just in the mood for something like aggressive and
Yep.
in your face. And some days it's like, it's a Slayer day. And some days you're like, I want to listen to Queen today, or I want to listen to
Right.
Sweet, something with good melodies, or
Yeah. Something I can kind of hum
today I'm
along
listening to
to.
folk music,
Yeah.
listening to aquatic folk
There you go.
today. Anyway, I mean, I'm going to start with the most obvious for me, and that's just traditional metal. I
Yes.
mean, and for me, this covers, like, I'm including in that, like, your Priest, your Maiden, your
Maiden.
Saxon,
Right.
but then I'm including, like, I'm not going to break it down into, like, I love, like, the new wave of traditional heavy metal, the new wave of British heavy metal,
Right.
new wave. We can argue about whether or not this is a genre or not.
Sure.
It's a movement,
Yeah.
okay, like, whatever, but it's that, mostly bands of that, Diamond Head from
Sure.
there, and Scorpions, like, so stuff like
Yes.
this that falls under this umbrella.
Right.
Like, I grew up on that stuff. I love it to this day. There's still, Grand Magus
Yep.
falls into here.
Sure.
So that's just, I mean, there's really not. It's a screamer, High Spirits.
Yep.
There's, Sabotage.
Absolutely.
Queensryche. We could go on and on and on
Yeah.
about these kind of bands, but from the your basic, get right down to it. I'm a sucker for traditional, especially if it's got double guitars
Yeah.
going. I
I'll,
love all that shit. So
I'll just I'll just piggyback right off of you because I was going to go with that too. And I think it's kind of come full circle for me because, as we were saying, when the breakdown of genres kind of started to appear and became more prominent, you know, went into thrash and, broke off. But for me, especially at this age, it's kind of all come back around where I really just enjoy good traditional, metal. But under that same umbrella and, going into another subgenre, I think that it sits on the fence of it could go either way. So power metal. There's a lot of bands that say they are power metal where I'm like, okay, I can't really define power metal. I know it's, good triumphant and, marching into battle kind of stuff. But then there's bands that, are so-called power metal, but to me, it's just metal. I remember it seems like Hammerfall kind of started a little bit of a movement with their first album. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, that's power metal," and I've even heard Stradivarius, called power metal. Gamma Ray, Primal Fear. Fucking love Primal Fear. I know they've kind of fallen under that, but to me, I still say that's just metal. Those bands all fall under the metal umbrella. Where do you sit with that? Because that's a really tough one for me.
It is tough. And two, like I think geographically, geog geography. I was gonna say geographically. I don't know what I was gonna say. Geography plays a part in
Yes.
it. In that, there's definitely there can be there's sometimes once in a while, never. No, there is a style like when I talk about power metal to people, sometimes I'll say like well, I'm not as big into European power metal as like U.S. power metal. Like okay, let me set this up.
Clear your
Let me
thoughts.
get this clear my thoughts. When we're talking like European power metal, we're talking about like Halloween,
Yes.
Hammerfall,
Sure.
Gamma Ray, um, Blind Guardian,
Yep.
stuff
Big
like
time.
that.
Yeah.
Rhapsody. I'm not a big Rhapsody fan, but like Rhapsody.
Yep.
Um, so bands like that. There's like a vibe to that music. Almost, I don't want to say it's happy sounding, but it's got more of a the vocals tend to be a little bit cleaner.
Hmm.
Um, definitely, with power metal, most of the singers are going to have like the higher vocals, but
Right.
almost like a cleanness.
I think there's a
Um,
lot more up tempo too. I think European quote unquote power metal has that faster tempo,
yeah, it's kind of
compared
like
to that.
a lot of it's kind of like I used to like if I was gonna like beer drinking kind of like happy kind of like upbeat choruses
Yeah.
like sing along.
Yep.
Whereas like U.S. power metal, then now you're talking about bands like Jag Panzer,
Right.
Riot. I
Hmm.
would throw into there. Um, so it's weird, like the U.S. power metal bands kind of like in some ways are a little bit heavier.
Yeah.
Iced Earth,
Sure.
um, and but they still all fit kind of like under that same tag. But there's
Yeah.
kind of like a
Yeah.
split. But
Yeah.
the bigger, I think the a lot of the biggest longest lasting power metal bands, I think like you mentioned Hammerfall had when they came out, they definitely like reinvigorated
Yeah.
the genre. Again, I'm not like a huge fan, but I do appreciate them for what they are.
Yeah. I think they ignited.
Mike Wunsch from Last Rites, like I'll rib him about Hammerfall. His I'll butch. But yeah, like Blind Guardian, I love them. I love
Yeah.
um, the vocals, especially Halloween. I
Yeah.
love all eras of Halloween. I'm not as big on those two wonky records in the middle, but
Oh yeah.
with Kiski, but I love the going back to the early stuff all the way through the Andy Darius to now, like that they're all together in one big triumphant.
I mean, and Halloween used to be considered, speed metal. I mean, Walls of
Yeah, I mean, well,
Jericho.
the first Walls of
Yeah.
Jericho pretty much is a speed metal record, man. I mean, borderline like that was like people that I knew that were into thrash were on that. And then they
Yeah.
like with Keeper they streamlined that a little bit. It wasn't
Yeah.
the that when like Ride the Sky starts on that on
Oh
Walls of
yeah.
Jericho, like that guitar is like a buzz saw
Oh, big time. Big
in
time.
there. So and that kind of like smoothed out just a little bit, like but yeah,
Yeah. There's
it's just
definitely it's definitely two different flavors for sure. That you know, it's good that you mentioned that because if you talk European power metal versus US, I think US quote unquote power metal is just to me that is for sure. I just call it metal. Like you said, Riot, Jake Panzer, that perfect examples. Um, I like Savage Master. I think that's just metal to me too. I mean, maybe some people consider those guys more power, but either way. But yeah, I think European. It's definitely the themes and things that they bring into the fold. Especially when Hammerfall first started, and then there was another band too that kind of rode their tails. I think they were called Lost Horizon, and
I
they
love Lost Horizon. I mean,
yeah,
those two records are
those first two were great.
phenomenal.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
for me, I think I'm not taking anything away from them because they were good, but it was like they saw what Hammerfall was doing and we're like, okay, I see where we're going next. which is fine. There was a big explosion. I think Hammerfall caused a big explosion in that movement. There was a lot of bands at once, and I don't know. I Primal Fear is probably like going to be my favorite for a long time. I've always enjoyed them. I love Ralph
Priest
Sheepers,
Priest worship.
Priest Worship, man.
Some of those
But
songs could come
man,
right off Priest records, man.
yeah,
Chainbreaker and
yeah, gotta give it to Ralph Sheepers, man. That guy's got pipes
dude,
too. He's fantastic. So
he's got pipes for days.
so
It is
okay,
amazing.
we love our traditional, just plain old good heavy metal. All right, what would come next for you? In no particular
The,
order.
the next one for me, I'm gonna go with Doom.
Well,
Everyone
let's
knows
talk
me.
about it
Everyone
because
knows
that
I'm
was what I was going to say too. So we can just discuss Doom
I
now.
mean, yeah. I mean, and what I love about Doom, like, really is the for me, like, and when I'm talking about the Doom that I really love, it's I like Paradise Lost and Anathema, and
Yeah, My Dying
I
Bride.
like some, My Dying Bride, and I like some Death Doom, and um, I'll dabble in Funeral Doom, or what, Evoken and
Yeah,
stuff like, Mourning Beloveth, for
sure.
Death Doom, stuff like that. But my main, you know, love is the Sabbathy,
Yeah,
Your Trouble,
yeah,
Candlemass,
sure.
Pentagram,
Yep.
and bands like Aura Druin, Pale Divine,
The fat
the
riffs, man.
the Obsessed, Place of Skulls, like
Yeah.
its guitar tone, like that fat
Yep.
fucking Tony
Thick.
Iommi
Yeah.
esque thick guitar tone that'll like melt your face off.
Right.
Lost Crusades, another one that I love. Early Moods, we talked about them before.
Yep.
Like, we'll just go on, and I'm not going to keep naming bands, but you can
No, I
Solitude
know.
Eternus. I am going to keep naming bands.
Blood
Um,
Farmers.
Blood Farmers. I mean, Earth Ride. Like, it's just like
Revelation.
Revelation, Penance, um,
Exactly.
Apostle of Solitude.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So many Gates of Slumber. So many great bands. It's those big riffs. I love a lot of the vocalists. Like, I just love like the clean vocals.
Yeah.
It's like the song topics are cool. Ranging from serious, personal songs to more macabre kind of,
Yeah.
horror. Your
Yep.
Lovecraft kind of stuff, and then get into like Conan. It runs
Yeah. Your
the
D and
gamut.
D.
You get politics, D&D, like whatever, all kind of stuff discussed in Doom. And within Doom, there's a lot of variety. I mean, Candlemass doesn't sound like Saint Vitus,
Right.
other than there's that maybe commonality of Sabbath
Right.
in
Right.
in most of it. So I just love, the big riffs get me, man. I love those big
Yep.
Sabbath. My favorite like guitar tones are Iommi, Victor Griffin, and Terry Weston. Like those
Yeah. Yeah.
guitar tones will like snap your neck.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. For me too. I was going to bring up Doom on my next one too. And, for me, we were so absolutely just in engulfed in thrash metal. I mean, we were to the point where it's like it can't get fast enough. We were always looking for the, as fast as you could get. Even like, that band Wehrmacht, just
Yeah.
oh my God, those guys were like blazing fast. We're like, yes, this is the next level. We were so involved in the thrash scene, but it was exciting because I think we like thrash so much. I guess I'm just going to bleed into the next thing here a little bit too.
Do it.
We were there, with our age. We were there when thrash happened. We were there from the birth of it. We were old
Yep.
enough to understand it, and it was exciting and new. And man, we just couldn't get enough. Fast forward, how many years? 30 years, whatever. And that kind of wore thin after a while. And going back and rediscovering Candlemass and Trouble and the Obsessed, and it was like, oh man, you tend to forget just how fucking heavy. You think thrash was heavy, but you let one of those fat riffs just fucking play out, and that just crushes you. And I forgot all about how good slower music was. So I really was like, embraced Doom. I was like, I'm going back into this now and rediscovering what I knew was already out there, but so much more, And I've brought him up before. My good friend Brian Soltis, him and I, we went to so many Doom shows back in the day where, we saw Yob play in front of 4 people, and then they're playing in front of big crowds too.
Yeah.
I got to know the guys in Gates of Slumber and befriended Jason McCash, and we'd go down to the Templars of Doom. I'm pretty sure it's probably the first time I met you, even though we probably didn't strike up another conversation until later, and did my own fests and all that.
Right.
But I forgot just how good riff oriented, slower stuff was. So I could not get, I still can't. I still am a sucker for a good riff record. Um, be it Pentagram, Pale Divine, or Druin. Epicurean Mass is one of my all-time favorites. I know we
Great.
brought up Cemetery Earth and Thunder Perfect Mind. Such good albums. I don't know how you feel about being lumped into it, but the Argus albums, the same thing. Just so good. Such good guitars. The vocalist, he's okay, but
He's kind of a dick.
he's kind of a dick.
He's kind of a dick, but he's okay on a good day. You could sing it. On a bad day, he's pretty bad.
He's pretty old, pretty bad. But and there was so much more. We're thrash. It was just so blindingly full speed ahead that there's so much more emotion in doom metal. You can really just sit back, listen to it, throw on a Revelation album and just get lost, and it just brings you so much. There's so much more substance to it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I absolutely still, I love doom. I haven't probably been into it as much as I was in the last year or so. I've kind of come back around where I'm really enjoying just traditional heavy metal, but I've always got that soft spot for a lot of the good doom stuff. So
Yeah, for sure.
Doom on.
Doom on. Well, you brought up thrash, so I'll bring it up because that's among my favorites.
Cool.
And like you said, like we were on we were there as it was breaking, and
Yeah.
this was like something for me that I was like, I think the first things I remember hearing were definitely songs by Metallica and Metal Church were the
Okay.
first things I heard. And I heard Fade to Black on WYSP out of Philadelphia. It was YSP or WMMR. I'm sure I heard it on Metal Shop on WYSP. Well, WYSP was cool. They did their own. They just took the intro, but then they did their own
Yeah,
show.
I remember you saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, Darren has talked about that too. So I definitely heard Metallica on there, and then the local college stations played stuff. So bands like Metallica and Anthrax were the first, but Ride the Lightning was the first thrash record I owned, and I remember, I'm sure I told the story in here before, putting the needle on, and you get that little acoustic thing at the beginning of Fight Fire with Fire, and that song comes in, and it's like, what am I listening to? Like I was just like, what is this? Like it was like extreme at the time, like for me.
Yep.
And it took me a while to like catch on to that. Hetfield was not the most extreme vocally, but like I like, there's a lot of melodic stuff he does in that record too. But at the time, like that was as heavy as it got. Like, and it was for me because I hadn't heard Slayer and Exodus yet. I'd heard Anthrax and I heard Metallica, and so then I started like, well, friends are like, well, my buddy, oh, check out Slayer, and so I'm listening to Slayer, and like that's a little bit. The vocals were a little bit rough for me. Like Slayer at the time, I was like, I don't know. Like it wasn't until like Rain and Blood with some of the riffs on. Like Postmortem was that Angel of Death caught me with those. They'd get into those mid tempo, like just like banger, like riffs, like catchy riffs. But I loved Anthrax. I remember like the college radio show. One of the colleges had like a whole thrash show in here and stuff like Overkill and Metallica and Slayer and bands like later on Sepultura and Creator and some of the bands like Sodom, like some of the bands were too extreme for me, and some of them like I loved Metal Church. I love it. I was like that. I guess I initially geared myself more towards the bands that had singers that were more singers like Forbidden.
Yeah.
But I did love stuff like Exodus. Like Paul Bailoff is just like crazy. Like some kid at school, one of my buddies at school is like, slid me a cassette. Is like, you gotta hear this band, the Bonded by Blood, and you like go through the lyrics of the songs. I'm like, oh, I got to hear that now. And to get it home, and you're like, oh my god, like this is like crazy. And the first time I heard Celtic Frost, I was totally appalled by the
Like,
vocals.
what?
And the more I listened to it, the more I got into it.
Yeah.
And I always like, I never, there's that line between thrash and speed metal too. I never know whether to include them
Yeah.
in the same thing or split them out. I'll just say
I don't
thrash
even
for
know
now.
where that
But
line is.
yeah, I don't know, because there's some stuff that like there's some speed metal that's like borderline thrash, and some thrash that's
Yeah.
exciter. Like, what is that, thrash or is it speed metal?
Right.
I mean, I guess most people would say speed, but it definitely fits in with, I'd hear it on the thrash
Right.
shows. Where does Voivod fit? I mean, they just get weird
Yeah.
later on. Same
Well,
with Sonic Frost. And
even Megadeth, weren't they? If maybe I'm thinking wrong, but weren't they first like kind of promoted as the state of the art speed metal band? Wasn't that Megadeth's tag, or am I thinking wrong here?
probably, I mean, they definitely were fast when they came
Somebody in
out.
the
And then,
comments will let me know about that for sure.
yeah, I'm
But
sure.
but yeah,
But I,
I always kind of that was a blur, because I know some bands would be like, oh, this is speed metal, and I love those Speed Kills compilations. I've got a bunch of those. But they would throw bands like Death on there and stuff, which I'm like, okay, I don't know. This doesn't really justify speed metal, but I don't know. Anyway, that's all hearsay or, here or there. But yeah, I always had a problem with that too. It was like, because to me, a lot of the bands that were so-called speed metal were just thrash metal to me. Agent Steel, I think, was booked as speed
yeah,
metal, thrash metal. And I didn't care. Either way, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just another label. But yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I think now that you bring that up, it's hard for me to remember. There was and I might have brought this up once before. There was a radio station in Chicago called WVVX, and they had a metal show on. God, I don't even remember what day of the week it was. But I was up on the in Wisconsin. It was really hard to tune this in. It was always coming really good on rainy days and stuff. But anyway, I'm pretty sure the first so-called thrash I heard on there was also Metallica. And then I do remember that they played, I don't remember if it was the Fistful of Metal or if it was Spreading the Disease, but I know that's the first time I heard Anthrax too. So it was those two. And then yeah, I can say the same as you. I'm almost positive that Ride the Lightning was the first thrash album that I bought. And I remember thinking that too. I was like, nothing is ever gonna top Fight Fire with Fire. Never. This is top of the
it's as
mountain.
heavy as it gets.
This is it, man. We have reached the end. There's nothing more than Fight Fire with Fire. Little did we know,
Yeah.
But I just remember we were so excited about that. And luckily in Kenosha, at that age, there was always bands playing at the local Eagles Club. I've talked about this before. So we were exposed to so many different bands. It was great, good punk scene. And we were in our first little basement band playing as fast as we could. But I just remember the build up, knowing that Master of Puppets was just around the corner and the anticipation for that album. We were just losing our freaking minds waiting for that to come out. And then when it did, it delivered on all levels. And we lived and breathed that album, forever. It was just
Same.
I've got such good fond memories of that time, and you've got your favorites, but that was the era of scouring the liner notes. Like, oh man, who's Exodus? Okay, who's that? I gotta look that one up. And Exciter and Razor,
Nuclear
Assault, yeah,
Hyrax.
definitely Hyrax, all of those. So you go to the local store and you're looking for all these, and you just couldn't get enough, and it was just that awesome moment of discovery of that genre that was just, sounds corny to say, but it was magical. Yeah, that was such a good time.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, and there's just like, man, it's for music that's so aggressive. It was such a fun style too, man. I mean, just like you just totally like neck snap and bang your head,
Oh yeah.
like I'm still not a big mosh pit guy, but just as an outlet for, you know, aggression, like thrash just really, got a lot out,
Yeah.
again, like lyrically, I think too, like one of the cool things about thrash was it delivered on, not only the personal, but the political,
Yep.
and, got, kids interested in things other than, other, then while other music was, and not to say
Sure.
anything wrong with this, and we'll talk about it in a little bit anyway with other genres, but like, love songs or singing about partying and sex and stuff, and not
Right.
that there wasn't some, you get bands like Tankard that sang about drinking and stuff like that. So, but in
Alcoholica.
thrash, I mean, Alcoholica, and I mean, you had bands touching on crazy stuff, but
Yeah.
there was just a diversity in viewpoints and
Yeah.
and an intelligence in a lot of thrash lyrics that I think was cool.
Yeah, I agree with
To
that too. Yeah, it wasn't all, love and roses and rainbows, and it was, a lot of it was, politically fueled, or
history.
I was gonna say history. I mean, a lot of bands, sang about just, the horrifying things that happened in history and things like that.
Yeah.
And, it was like a history lesson here and there. But yeah, it was, a little bit more on the cerebral side, made you think a lot more than some of the other candy coated things. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Thrash was just
the very first Milwaukee Metal Fest is what really did it for a lot of us, because that was, such a pinnacle event. It was it was such a great cross section, but that was right when thrash was going crazy, and it was at the absolute starting point of death metal, which I guess I'll just roll into that too. But we saw Blood Feast and At War, but then we saw I think it was the one of, if not the very first shows from Death outside of Florida, and it was the very first show outside of California for Death Angel. Zoe Trope, it was Trouble, King Diamond headlined. I mean, it was such an amazing cross section, but there was so many of those bands we didn't know yet, but when we saw them, we were like, holy shit. The next day we ran down and bought tapes from everybody that we saw that day. So that was definitely a pinnacle event for me.
Excuse me.
Young Mike in his metal days. Gesundheit. So, but yeah, good old thrash metal, man. So,
and there's still we talked about a lot of older bands, but there's still bands that are doing it. I really like Gamma Bomb.
Yeah.
And there's a band from Germany called Space Chaser that I think is really good. And you were just talking about a band during our Keepers of the Flame episode that's coming up.
Misfire.
So, I mean, there's definitely bands still doing good. I mean, and I think a lot of the old school bands are still making great records. Like, I think Testament, Overkill are
definitely
still pumping out good stuff. And there's I think it's definitely, there's a deep bench for thrash. And thankfully, there's still bands as metal's gotten more extreme, I think thrash is traditional thrash is gotten lost a little bit in the crowd, but I think there's still a lot of good stuff out there if you're willing to look for it.
Oh, without a doubt. I'll even say too, every genre has that, resurgence, and thrash kind of had that uptick a few years back. And I think for me anyway, in my observation, it seemed like Municipal Waste kind of had or headed that little wave of that revival of thrash. And it seemed like there was a whole bunch of, new wave of thrash metal bands that came out.
Yeah. Evil and Manic Ritual, Bonded by Blood, bands like that. Gamma Bomb was in that group, and they're still around.
Yep. I think Condition Critical, they were one of those in there too. There's so many of them, but yeah, I think you're right though. I think thrash has definitely got some longevity left in it. And these bands that we grew up with, like you mentioned, Testament, Overkill, are kind of falling into that legacy band category, when it comes to thrash metal now. And it's good to see they're still putting out the quality material also.
Yeah, for sure.
So, we interrupt this regularly scheduled program to bring you Mark Weiner.
Hello, everybody. And for the sake of all that's heavy, I am Mark Weiner from the band Cokus, and I'm honored to be a part of the 5 top genres, according to the newest podcast that Blood and Butchie is putting together here. I'll keep it short and sweet. I'd have to go with first classic rock, my Zeppelin, my Pink Floyd, The Who, Deep Purple, Cream, Jesus Christ, That's enough right there for that genre. After that, I'd probably have to go into the grunge era. I was a huge fan of that stuff. Obviously, two bands that come to mind immediately are Soundgarden and the Melvins. Still to this day, huge Melvins fan. Still listen to Soundgarden, if you believe me. Third genre I really got into also in the 90s was the stoner rock. Caius was really huge for me. And around the back end, Gold Snake, I don't know if they're considered stoner rock. Maybe more the next genre that I'm going to go into, Doom. And I love this genre, and I have lots of friends in this genre, and a few bands from Earthride, Pale Divine, Penance. We got Earth and Grave, which I was in, Legions of Doom. Oh my God, you can go on an Iron Man, Apostle of Solitude, Argus. I mean, Doom has so much talent in that genre. And last one, I'd have to say a little bit of progressive. Not the hugest follower of progressive bands, but I thought King Diamond was really progressive. And I don't know if this band falls into that category. They're a Chicago band with no vocalist, Pelican. I think they're pretty progressive, long songs. Really good band, no singer. If you ever need a singer, I'm in Chicago. You should look me up. And last but not least, I want to add that Cokus will be playing the Maryland Doom Fest June 20th at 4 o'clock. And then we're shooting to Pittsburgh, Black and Yellow, hanging out with Butchie and Argus, their first show in 5 years. And the boys in the Midwest from Indiana, Apostle of Solitude, Chucky and the boys coming through. Looking forward to it. It's going to be a great summer, a great year. Got t-shirts. Look out for us for upcoming shows and events. Much love and peace. Thank you.
We're now returning to your regularly scheduled program. All right, what are you going to roll into?
I'm going to roll into... Man, I'm going to go with... This is the oldest kind of genre, so to speak, on my list, but it kind of falls in between metal and it's kind of like a brother sister thing to Doom in a way, and that's proto metal from like 70s.
Yeah. Okay.
Proto metal, like riff rock. We're talking like the bands that basically sounded like were the heaviest thing you heard at the time that weren't Black Sabbath, and most of these bands didn't make it big. I mean, in proto metal, you had your, the originators of metal. Really, you won't get too much argument, or Sabbath, Deep Purple,
right.
Heap, Zeppelin is in there. People want to go back to Blue Cheer. I don't so much toss them in the metal thing, but there's no denying that they were loud and heavy, and Mountain and stuff like that. But there's a whole set of bands around the world that were making music so heavy, like Bang, United States, whose first album is basically almost like a Lost Sabbath record, and Jerusalem, who did one album, produced by Ian Gillan, which is just frantic, heavy, so heavy for its time, and Sir Lord Baltimore, awesome Leaf Hounds, bands like that, Geronimo, like they, just obscure hard stuff. You ever hear hard stuff?
Yep.
What?
Yep.
Freaking, just so much. There's just so much good. Buffalo. I mean, man, freaking
that album's nuts.
Buffalo, the Shylock from Buffalo. I'm a skirt lifter, not a shirt raiser. Like Dead Forever. Such great songs from those guys. Australian heavy band. Like there's just, I'm a Toad. Like just like these
Toad,
loud, like just loud, like heavy again, like riffs, but then they're like, but like ripping guitar playing, and then some bands, like bands like band like Bodkin that was like real, heavy, like Hammond kind of vibe that had like more of a, and then Captain Beyond, like
Captain Beyond,
just
sure. Yep.
sick, like just some of it's just so heavy for its day, like riffs for days, great playing, great rhythm sections, and great singers. I'd go back to the 70s stuff. Like I'll even like some of the earlier hard rock bands, like I think kind of like dovetail a little bit into like proto metal. Like
Sure.
I think the first couple Angel records, there's moments that fall into that. There was a band called Marcus that had one record
Mhm.
that has some like super heavy stuff on there. Legs Diamond, the
Lex
first
Diamond
couple
there.
records, like there's just like this section of heavy that never, you know, man, like Irish Coffee, Murphy Blend, like they're all these obscure, like just heavy rock bands, and some were heavier than others. And
Yeah.
um Josephus, I don't know
Yep.
if I'm saying that Josephus or Josephus or however you pronounce it, like um just so much Frigid Pink, if you want to throw them in there, more
Oh, I love
psychedelic.
Frigid Pink. Yeah. But they've still
But
got that fuzz. They still got that riff,
yeah, Truth and Janie, like
Yep.
bands like this that like pretty much set the freaking table for what would become doom and then stoner rock
Yeah.
later on. Stray,
Yep.
Stray Dog.
Sure.
There's so much good, out
You
of
can make an argument for that first
Blues
Grand Funk
Creation out
album
of
too, man.
Japan.
Oh yeah, Blues
Yeah.
Creation. Fantastic album. Yes. Fantastic band. That's a fun rabbit hole to go down, which I do on occasion. It's like, okay, what else was simmering under the surface during the Sabbath, you know,
Yeah.
when it first came about? You know that
You'll
there was more. There had to be
you'll
some
go down that hole and not come out, because there's stuff like that got released over the years that it's like,
Yeah.
man, like if they were known beyond their local area, like Siampe or Siampi, however you pronounce it, then you got, Flower Traveling Band out of
Yep.
Japan. And yeah, there's just so much stuff to find. Granicus
Yeah.
with
Oh,
their
Granicus. The Ohio
they ended
version.
up with they ended up with another couple records which aren't near as good.
Yeah.
That first record, that one record they did back then, man, just
It's awesome.
killer
Yeah.
hard rock. Left End.
You ever heard
You
Head
know,
Over Heels?
I don't think I have.
Oh, God. I go back and forth with Darren about this because I love this band. They should have been right up there with like Aerosmith at the early stages. So good, man. Just good riff rock and yeah, Head Over Heels. I'd look that one up too.
I'll have
But
to
yeah,
check them
yeah,
out,
I can lose hours at a time
dude.
when I
Easily.
go down that proto metal. It's like, man, oh, look at this, and spending so much time on YouTube. I'm like, oh shit, I've been doing this for 4 hours now.
Dude, we would go to our buddy Stump's house,
Yeah,
and he he had the biggest CD and record collection of anyone that I know. And like he would get so excited. Like we'd go over and he'd like just start pulling CDs and playing stuff for us. And he'd be like, oh, have you heard this? Or yeah, that's where I
yeah,
first heard Jerusalem and some of
sure,
these other bands and Granicus. And he would just like, it was like album upon album
yeah.
of like, and I would come home with like stacks of CDs that I'd borrow from him after he'd write them down, what I borrowed, like a library card. And I'd bring them home and like make copies of them and like
Yeah,
listen to them for days. Like there was so much stuff, like it just never ends. Like
no, go on
and there's
forever.
bands all over the world. You go to Greece for Socrates, and I think they changed their name to Socrates Drank the Conium. And there's just, in Italy, there's Il Rovescio della Medaglia.
Yep,
And
yep.
that first record of theirs is so heavy. And
Mm,
November from Sweden, which is more like a little bit more jammy, but has some like skull
yeah,
crushers
yep, yep.
too. Like again, we could be here all night.
No,
It's like a rabbit hole. If you like that old 70s, like just heavy, like if you like stuff like Sabbath and Deep Purple and Heap and Zeppelin
yeah,
and Blue Cheer and Mountain, like in those, old Nazareth, like
yeah,
if there's stuff like in there that you like, Grand Funk, whatever, like look it up, man. Like look into, there's so many other bands that you will like
yeah.
that you
You
may never have heard of. We could be here all week.
you can lose days at a time uncovering those. It's It's amazing. That's how my friend Brian is. He's like my version of Stump. We would burn CDs.
Everyone's got a stump.
Everybody's got a stump. My Uncle Bry. And I've got like in the closet spindles full of CDRs that him and I would trade over the years of all kinds of crazy ass stuff. So that's a good one. That's yeah. The proto metal stuff is fun to explore.
For sure.
Um Next for me is it was just a gradual seamless transition from thrash and they ran parallel, was death metal. And I owe all of that to seeing Death for the very first time, and they were just playing, the Mantis demo stuff and Scream Bloody Gore, and I was like, what is this? I think that was the first time I really heard that guttural singing, and it was just fucking brutal. I was like, this is nuts. So off and running from there, and then I couldn't get enough. It was from Death, and then Possessed, and Incantation, and Immolation, and all those early death metal bands. You know, even Deceased. The early like Relapse. Bands that were out there, and
Mm.
Combat was putting stuff out. So yeah, death metal for me because
Earache.
it was still, oh yeah, earache for sure. It was still fast, but it was just that much more, heavy. The riffs were different. There wasn't all the high pitch stuff, and it was a little bit more primal and aggressive, and it was just like the next level. But we were still diehard thrash, but we were like, well, we like this death shit too. So those two ran together on a single lane highway for us for a long time. So. And I still love my death metal. I still buy quite a bit of some of the newer bands that are coming out, which maybe we'll do another episode, but on the death metal stuff.
For sure. Yeah, death is one of those things. Death metal is one of those things that, man, when I like a band, I really like a band, but it's hard it's hard for me to. The vocals are the make or break for me a lot
Yeah,
of the time, and sometimes it just depends on the riffs. Like I love Entombed, I
sure.
love Dismember,
Yep.
which I mean they sound a
Same.
lot alike.
Yeah. Well, they've got that
You know
that buzz saw,
that
that buzz saw
Swedish,
tone.
that
Yeah.
Gothenburg sound.
Yes, absolutely.
I liked In Flames up until they decided they were Corn.
Ugh, yeah.
Um, and you know, there's bands that come and go that I think like I went back to bands like I initially like could not. I It was rough. Death metal was rough for me to get into. I remember the metal show at WPTS at Pitt in the '90s, and Metal Mary used to have that would have had her the overnight show and would play like some regular metal too, but played a lot of death metal, and a lot of it I was just like I listened to it every week. But there were some of it was like she's playing like Nocturnus and
Yeah.
Morbid Angel and Entombed and um,
Atheist and
Death and Atheist
Morbid
and stuff.
Angel. Yeah.
Yeah, some of that stuff I
Cannibal Corpse.
ended up Obituary, like some of that stuff I ended up getting into later, like
Yeah,
Entombed grew on me, and
sure.
um, but and even like that first Cathedral, like the Farce
Oh,
Equilibrium,
sure.
like
Yeah.
was real. Like the vocals were so rough for me at the time. Like it was a tough sell.
Yeah.
Over the years, as I've gone back to it, stuff that I didn't really care for back then. Like I listen to Bolt Thrower now, and I'm like, oh, this is like
It's
those
awesome. Yeah.
riffs are like killer. There's killer riffs on
Yeah.
those records. Like it borderlines Doom at times. Like
It's I kind of did that with Deicide because when the first Deicide album came out, we were like, kind of like with Fight Fire with Fire, we were like, oh, this is it, man. Ain't gonna get any crazier than this. And Benton kind of had the vocal effects on his vocals a little bit that
yeah,
gave it that aura. And but I tell you what, I kind of went back and like Once Upon the Cross, is tremendous. I kind of because it has a little bit more of the slower breakdowns and stuff on that album. It's still blindingly fast death metal, but they mix it up a little bit and it gave it a little bit more dynamic. And I listen to that now and I'm like, man, this album fucking is incredible. So and I think a lot of those bands did where they came out just 100 miles an hour, and then later on they kind of added a little bit more to what they were doing, got a little bit more creative, and just gave it that extra dose of heaviness too.
Yeah, I think the bands in death metal that like today that or over the years that I've ended up liking a lot are bands that did something like a little bit that weren't just so straightforward, just like death metal, like that latest Blood Incantation
Oh,
record, like
dude.
what they do with
Yeah.
the science fiction spacey,
Yep.
Pink Floyd kind of vibes and stuff. Agalloch,
Amazing. Yep.
like did some great stuff. Um, and Opeth,
Yeah.
for me, like those dudes, like just that you throw a little bit of clean vocal in there goes a long way for me. To being more open towards like letting the music then sink in. Like that's what
Right.
did like Amorphous with Black Winter Day when I bought or that song and then like the whole Tales from a Thousand Lakes
Yeah.
album when you know the clean vocals would come in and stuff. It would like they always say they seem to come in at the right moment for me.
Yeah.
My first couple times through it to like regain my Amorphous ended up, I don't think people are going to argue they're a death metal band now, although they have, you know, deathy vocals still,
Yeah.
but they're probably more associated with like, progressive metal in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, or I don't even know how they're different. They do their own
Yeah.
thing, but like they were just an example of a band like an Opeth where the clean vocals offset the death vocals to allow me the time to get into the music and then start to appreciate actually the vocals, the heavier vocals themselves.
Sure.
Same with like Paradise Lost. Like I could go back and listen to Gothic as far back
Hmm.
as Gothic. I still can't really get into Lost Paradise, but like Nick Holmes, like his heavier stuff, like between the
Yeah.
Paradise Lost and then even what he did with he Bloodbath and stuff later on. Like
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a lot cooler with Death. If I can understand basically it comes down to if I can get the words, if I can hear the words,
Yeah.
it goes along. If it's just like I just can't do the real super guttural, can't understand anything that's being said.
No, I
And
know. Yeah.
so, but death metal, I think like there's so much out there, and so much of it is there's so much interesting stuff in bands, throwing so many different their bands that throw so many different elements in
Right.
that
Right.
I'll tell people if you think you don't like death metal at all, like don't be afraid to be patient with some things and try some different things that have different elements. You might find a
Yeah.
lot of music
Sure.
that you like. It wouldn't be in my top five, but if I had a top 10, it's in there.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, and I agree too. I think that's the biggest sticking point for a lot of people when it comes to death metal is the vocals. You know, I love Cannibal Corpse, but there's a lot of people that, the Chris Barnes era, the real guttural, what the hell? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right, right. What is he even saying? But then, you've got Deceased and King Fowley. You can clearly understand him,
Yep.
and he's such a good lyrical storyteller in those songs. So I think I definitely think that's a sticking point for a lot of people, whether they're going to dive in or not, is the vocals when it comes to death metal for sure. But
Yeah,
yeah,
for
I
sure.
love me good death metal. You want to go one more?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is I don't know. I mean, it's regular. This is like what I grew up on. I mean, I love hard rock. I love me
There
some
you
hard
go.
rock, and I'm gonna
Yeah,
just like lump hard rock is gonna include glam rock and glitter rock and hair metal, if you want to call it that. Just and maybe AOR too.
sure,
Like I'm just calling it hard rock.
sure.
Your commercial kind of radio ready hard
Yeah,
rock. I mean, I grew up on stuff like from Kiss to Motley Crue to Dokken
sure.
to Rat to Tesla to Poison. I like Poison. I'm not ashamed to admit I
Yeah.
don't give a shit.
Night
Um,
Ranger.
Night Ranger. I mean, even stuff that was Triumph.
Oh yeah, hell
Um,
yeah.
there's Saunters from Canada, Coney Hatch,
Yep,
Fastway. Again, like I could Rough Cut. We were just talking about Rough Cut today
yep,
because unfortunately Chris Hager just
yep,
passed away, 67 years of age, lead guitar player from Rough Cut. Rest in peace to Chris. We'll probably do a piece on him.
definitely.
Y and T.
Yep,
there are just so many great bands like White Snake.
Sure.
I mean, early White Lion. I like some of the later White Lion stuff too. And
First album was really good. I like that first album a lot. Yep. I know what
yeah,
you
and I
mean.
mean, there's just so much good stuff out there. That's just like good fun rock that isn't necessarily
Sure.
like
I
gonna
mean, I don't
knock
know
your
if you can.
doors off metal wise. I mean, bands like
Yeah.
Shout at the Devil's a super. I think it's a metal record. Quiet Riot's Mental Health is borderline metal, but I mean, it's not
Sure.
like Van Halen. That's not gonna beat you over the head with how heavy it is. Although
Right.
there's heavy stuff, but it's just like great. I just love that style, man, and everything. Every band from Angel to Stars in the '70s to Aerosmith.
Oh yeah, for
Your
sure.
bluesier
Yep.
Cinderella.
I
I
mean, I
grew
don't
up
know
with
if you
all that
can.
stuff.
I don't know if you can.
Bane.
Here's a good one. I don't know if you can call them hard rock. I guess you could. Maybe they're a little more AOR. But if you're going to go down that route too, early REO Speedwagon, Styx, Cheap
Yeah.
Trick, all of those fit in there, and that's all such fantastic stuff. I and
Hell
that
yeah.
and I'm a sucker for a good melody too. So there is a lot of that I enjoy. I love Night Ranger. I think that's another very underappreciated band. Those guys did so much good stuff. But
Yeah, they have a lot of great. I love "Don't Tell Me You Love Me," and
sure,
I'm like a sucker for like their some of the like "You Can Still Rock in America," and I
oh
love the
sure,
title track from Seven Wishes
great, yep,
is killer. I mean,
yep,
great musicians. There's just it's just there's so much loudness. Icon. No, we would have called all this stuff like metal back then, Twisted
sure,
Sister. But I mean, arguably, I like Europe. Um, Especially like man, I know there's early Europe especially was a little bit more metal, and
yeah,
then they got commercial, and then like their last bunch of records have been like real like bluesy kind of like '70s
yeah,
hard rock, which I love. There's just so much good stuff out there that's just like
it's so hard.
you wouldn't today necessarily call it metal, but it's
Yeah,
hard rock like the Helicopters, man. That's
sure,
great, like killer hard rock. I mean,
hell
you
yeah,
can't beat hard. I mean, I don't think you can beat hard rock with a stick. The Sweet, I mean, how early
sure,
you want to go? I mean, there was great stuff coming out in the Montrose
yeah,
in the
oh
early '70s. I mean,
man. Those first couple of Montrose albums are incredible. And you
yeah,
bring up
man. I
you
mean,
bring up Aerosmith too. If I had a top 10, great. Get Your Wings will be on there. That's such a good album. But again,
rocks.
yeah, it rocks. All of those. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great pick. I think hard rock is definitely a worthy genre. If I had a top 10, that would be definitely on mine too. There's so much good stuff. It might not quite qualify as metal. They might, jump over on that side of the fence here and there, but yeah, good lyrics, good melodies. I agree with you 100%. All right. Well, I guess I'm going to go the ultimate contrast to the hard rock. And my final one is black metal.
There it is.
There it is. Um, Now I had my CD store going full blast right when, well, I shouldn't say right when, but when the big, maybe some people even consider it the second wave. I don't know, but yeah, black metal took me by storm, man. I was like, it was different, it was scary, it was evil, and
Very
I'm a
scary.
sucker for that shit, man. Merciful Fate fan from way back, so I love all that evil shit. But yeah, for my first, taste of mayhem, I was like, "Oh, here we go. What is this?" And then it was immediately into Emperor, which is probably my all-time favorite black metal band. Followed closely by Cradle of Filth. He was a huge fan of Cradle of Filth. Um, so there's a couple other bands that were in that lumped in there that I can't even pronounce because there are some pretty weird ones in there. But it was just, I think it was the the scary aspect of it. The churches are burning, and and it's like, shit, these guys take this like serious. They're not joking around. So I was kind of drawn to that because it was, bordering on of chaos, which later became Lords of Chaos, the book and the movie. And Lambonic Art was another one that I was really into. So many to choose from. I at some point I did get burnt out because I think black metal into the second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever wave, um, just became a parody of itself, where anybody was slapping on corpse paint and running through the forest. And then I had the hardest time taking any U.S. black metal band serious because I'm like, no, that was a movement that stemmed culturally from Norway and the
Mm-hmm.
Scandinavian region. And I'm like, this band's from Texas, but they're black metal. It just didn't work for me at all. So it kind of burned out a little bit. I still will buy a black metal album here and there from some of the newer bands, but for that period though, man, it was good. It was fun. It was scary. We went and saw Cradle of Filth's very first ever North American show, and they did not disappoint. We saw Emperor. Actually, I just saw Emperor 2 years ago too, down at the Aragon, and they were spot on. And I hadn't seen them since I think they were here in '99 at one of the Milwaukee Metal Fest. Spot on, so good. So, but yeah, black metal that really sucked me in for a while there. I was really, really into it. I still am. I still enjoy it. I'll play Emperor all the time. That's my favorite. I think they were the most creative within that genre. Where some of the other guys just played as fast as they could and screamed at the highest pitch that they could.
Yeah, real lo-fi.
Yeah, very. Yeah, it was like, the Fisher Price tape recorder with the plastic microphone in the bedroom kind of, recordings. But
Yeah.
I like the production of the Cradle of Filth albums because they were very I don't like to call them gothic, but it was very romantic, kind of Dracula-esque kind of production and storytelling and things like that. So I really enjoyed that too. But yeah, black metal. Love black
Nice.
metal.
Yeah, there's for me, again, it's the shrieking vocals are a real rough sell for me. I think I appreciate there's some black metal I really appreciate, even
Sure.
if I don't like the vocals. I like some stuff that's more black metal adjacent. I don't know how people would classify Primordial. Um
They definitely are a branch on that tree for sure.
yeah, I love Primordial. Now
Me too.
Alan has a great singing voice, I think, and so when he goes harsh, it's not he doesn't do that.
Right.
The earlier stuff is the more harsh stuff, but I love Alan's voice. I love what Primordial does. Um Winter Philith has some good stuff. I really like the see now I'm an oddball though. Like it's like I say that and then but the record I like the best by them is they did a record that's like all acoustic and kind of
Yeah.
mellow. And then it's like there's like some stuff again that's adjacent that Ulver,
Sure.
it's more like that who have been all over the map stylistically.
Sure.
Um but
Dimmu
there's a
Borgir was
vibe.
really good.
There's like I like black metal musically that has like that epic
Right.
feel to it, like that.
Yeah.
Like there's parts of Destroyer 666. I don't know if they'd be considered more black metal or death metal or
Yeah.
how they're considered, but there's like just like I love that epic vibe. I remember talking to um there are certain things about it, like you can hear it like in some of those Viking years, the Bathory
Hmm.
records. There's a vibe to it that I've always said like I would like to incorporate like musically, like that stuff is I really like it. It's just the vocals that I can't.
Right.
So bands that kind of like can incorporate like those kind of like musically that vibe, but and I'm still it's a genre that I still have to I have to go back and listen to Emperor. I was just listening to Grand Declaration of War
Yep.
by Mayhem, and some of that was catching my ear surprisingly. Like so every once in a while, like I'll come upon something or I'll explore it. Now there's like some early stuff. Like you'll never convince me that Possessed was I mean I am will fully I'm fully on board that they're one of the most important bands in metal just because of the the effect they had. I mean they helped create black metal. I mean they're a super important band in the history of metal, but I just have never been able to listen to them because of Jeff's vocals. Like I just it's like nails on a chalkboard for me. Now they're not. I mean, the vocals aren't meant to appeal to everybody. That's what makes it. If it appealed to everyone, it'd be pop music, I guess. So I can't hear you for some reason. Are you muted?
I don't know how I did that, but you can hear
That
me
was
now,
weird.
right? Yeah, I don't know what it is about black metal. Kind of going with the vocals that you mentioned too. Um, there's the real abrasive stuff, like Mayhem and early Dark Throne, and then even Emperor kind of, evolved where they became more of that epic, and Ishan had those clean vocals. It wasn't all the screechiness. And then, Dimmu Borgir came along with that really high symphonic element that, and orchestrated that worked, really well. So, things did branch out where, it was more of the true Norwegian black metal, and then there was the stuff that kind of got a little bit more on the romanticism side of it. But yeah, I mean, like we always say, it's all subjective. It's whatever you like. It's your taste, whatever you enjoy. That's what matters the most. However, the music moves you. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it comes down with me. It just comes down to individual records. Like I can listen to. There's some Immortal that I think is cool.
yeah.
You mentioned Dark Throne. I've heard some stuff of theirs that is cool.
The early Satyricon albums were fantastic too, and then they got kind of weird too. I don't know what they did, but
Yeah, I'll have to check them out. I like a couple of Abbott solo records. Um, and I don't know. That's a genre that I have a lot of exploring to do. I suspect there's a lot of music out there that I would appreciate if I could just get past
yeah, I've
the
been doing a
vocals
lot
and
of
some of
that.
it.
Been doing that a lot more lately too. Like things that I didn't really care for in the past, I've kind of come back around to check out, and I'm like, oh, okay, it kind of works now. I kind of see what I missed. It's just a different perspective. And again, I say this a lot, but I don't know if it's. I'm very aware of the aging process right now, Butch. So,
Yeah,
so in this elder state of mind, I start to understand things I didn't in my youth. So, and I appreciate it a lot more. And then in turn, it's almost like a rediscovery. It's like, oh, okay, this is really good. So I get to enjoy it later in life. But anyway,
yeah,
all right. Well,
that's right.
there's our favorite genres. What's your favorite genre? Is it just metal? Is it black metal, death? I don't know. We could probably do a whole entire episode on prog metal. Maybe we'll do that.
Probably. And
I,
I thought about putting it on my list, but really I like prog more than prog metal. But I
yeah.
do like prog. But
Yep.
there's a we could do a whole thing on prog. We should just do a
I think we should.
series on all of these genres or
Okay.
something sometime.
Let's
Let
do it.
everyone out there let us know what you want. I mean, if you want us to dabble in, to get into some of this, I mean, we are your willing servants.
Yes, we are.
You
Maybe we missed like some blatantly obvious genres. Tell us. Let us know. Like Butch just said, we are here for you. So tell us what you would like.
but like and subscribe.
Comment.
And tell your friends. Tell your friends about us. Tell them to come aboard.
All of them.
It's
Definitely.
fun. It's warm in here. We're all friends here. We all we we all float down here.
Well, you too, Georgie.
You like balloons, Georgie?
We've got black metal down here, Georgie. Like and
That's some
subscribe,
Sean for you.
comment.
Yeah,
You need to subscribe, Georgie.
we've got Night of the Crime by Icon, Georgie. We got some hard rock. Vain no respect.
Oh shit. Well, okay. I can't
Join
even stop.
us
I guess we'll see everybody on the next episode of
for the sake
of
of
Heaviness.
heaviness. Yes.
So long.
Peace out.